Hello everyone and welcome to the first patch discussion for the 3.1 mock for PhD. Here are the implemented costs. I'll put these on the screen really quickly. You can pause the video at any point to take a closer look, and let's jump straight into it. First off, let's discuss the energy blessing. The blessing this time around only shows up on the first cycle of each wave. It doesn't show up on the 0th cycle. This can limit the impact of certain eidolons because when you have these eidolons you're trying to clear faster, you don't have this blessing helping you. Not only that, the Memo Sprite Advanced portion of the blessing can get pretty limited value. It only applies to two characters, Aglaia and Remembrance MC, and for Aglaia, Garment Maker does pretty negligible damage, and for RMC, Advancing Mem can potentially ruin charge management. The energy also has varying value in different teams. Some teams really like the energy, some teams don't really use energy whatsoever. It's important to note that this blessing doesn't actually add damage, and so we are relying on the raw damage of our teams to clear this mock, which, in conjunction with HP inflation, can make it pretty difficult for clear speeds to go fast, and so overall clear speeds this mock are slightly down. Now for the mock lineup, on side 1, we are dealing with Swarm. On side 2, we deal with Nicador. We're familiar with the Swarm. We've seen the Swarm before. It has the same mechanics it's always had, and it's just a giant meatball. As for Nicador, his mechanics benefit frequent AoE and frequent attacks. He takes a lot more damage if we complete these mechanics, and so it's a lot harder to brute force Nicador. Now let's talk about the state of Super Break. Super Break this mock mainly goes into side 1 because it's Ice and Imaginary Weak, which are elements that correspond to the elements of the main Super Break supports. Not only that, side 1 has reasonable toughness bars in comparison to Nicador, which has a full 240 toughness, making it very difficult to place Super Break into Nicador without heavier investment into your characters. Now, because side 1 is Imaginary Weak, Rappa this mock is very strong. The blessing also benefits her greatly because it mostly fixes energy problems at E0. It gives her a lot higher uptime on her ultimate, and by proxy, a lot higher uptime on her signature. So signature this mock provides a massive gap. Not only that, her E1 loses a bit of value because her E1 gives energy, and as said before, the energy this mock is not as appreciated. And not only that, Rappa can clear very cheaply. She has tons of teammate options. She only needs to take one of the major Super Break supports, be it Fugue or IMC, and she can clear in a reasonable amount of time. Because of this, Rappa and her cone will be getting slight nerfs. Now for the other Super Break DPS, Firefly this mock is performing slightly worse. She's not performing nearly as well as previous mocks. She's not clearing as fast. This mock, the energy blessing doesn't help her at all because when she drops out of state, she still doesn't have enough energy to immediately get back into her ultimate. So this mostly makes no difference to her at all, and her damage uptime is going to be the same as it's always been. Not only that, it's not fire weak, so she simply just does less damage. She also has a limited number of teammates. She does require more of the Super Break supports than Rappa does, and because of her limited nature, she won't be getting any nerfs, but her clear speed is still fine, so she won't be getting any buffs either. Now talking about Fugue, Fugue this mock is slightly weaker because Rappa no longer really requires the double break as much for her energy problems. Her E1 also gets less value this mock because the Super Break supports are on Element, and so the additional weakness break efficiency for the DPS is slightly less valuable, and it's mostly used for Boot Hill or Firefly, and for this reason, Fugue will be requiring a small buff. Now for the other Super Break support, IMC this mock is a lot stronger because it's Imaginary Weak, because there's AoE breaks, and because of the energy, IMC is able to abuse DDD. She is one of the best DDD abusers in the game right now, and just action advancing your whole team is very, very strong, and so for that reason, her cost with DDD will be greater than Fugue, but without DDD, her performance is still going to be worse than Fugue. She still doesn't provide as many damage increases that Fugue does, and for that reason, her cost will remain the same. Next up, for Rinmei, this mock is a lot weaker. Rappa doesn't really need her flower as much because Rappa advances herself. That flower is mostly used for Boot Hill and for Firefly because they rely on their own speed, and so they need the re-break to continue doing damage. Not only that, there's a lesser need for weakness break efficiency because other supports such as Pella are on element, IMC is on element, and not only that, Rinmei this mock is a lot less versatile. Usually she could be run with Dot, she could be run with Jingliu, but this mock specifically, Jingliu and Dot are not performing well, and for that reason, her flexibility has gone down, and so Rinmei will be requiring a small buff. Next up, let's talk about E1 Lingsha. E1 Lingsha is unironically the DPS now. She simply does more damage than E0 Firefly because the bunny just moves more. Not only that, she has a wide variety of teammates being the sustain, so you can just load up on supports, depth shredders, action advancers, and super break supports. It is important to note that she does require a super break support. That's where she becomes a damage dealer, and with her supports, she has clear speeds comparable to E2 Firefly, which is insane. For that reason, E1 Lingsha will be requiring a nerf. Next up for Boot Hill right now is slated to get buffs. However, under investigation, he does seem to be performing very, very well, especially in Sustainless. This mock specifically, Ice and Imaginary Week, is just on element for a lot of his supports. So he's able to run Sustainless much more comfortably. However, he does require E0 Fugue to function, otherwise he will not be getting any stacks. And so this is potentially a point of counterplay, and it makes it really hard to draft for him. Despite this, he's still functioning very well. We'll be keeping an eye on this, and potentially there will be nerfs in the future, but for now, he will be getting small buffs. We'll keep an eye on this. Next up, I talked a little bit about how Pella was good this mock because it's Ice Week, and she is very strong because she provides tons of break bar. She has mostly replaced Mei for break teams and is a lot more flexible because you can control how much break she provides. She's also flexible in being able to go on both sides because against Nikador, having a lot of AoE is really good for teams on side 2, so she's able to be played on both sides. The Energy Blessing also ensures a lot better uptime on her debuffs than before, and is really, really beneficial for her. For that reason, Pella will be requiring nerfs. Next up, Silverwolf is also back. She is performing pretty well because there's guaranteed implants with the Quantum Week on both sides. She provides a lot of single target breakbar and a lot of single target amp, and is really, really synergistic with Rappa and potentially Boot Hill because it gives them faster breaking in single target. The energy mock is also really good for her. Historically, Silverwolf has had problems with energy, with keeping up ult uptime, especially against multiple targets. The energy mock does help her a lot. For that reason, she will be getting a small nerf. Next up, let's talk about Erudition. This mock specifically against Nikador, because of Nikador's mechanics, a lot of Erudition characters got a lot stronger. For example, Jade is very strong against Nikador. It's Quantum Week for her, and there's constantly 5 targets for her to drive her follow-ups against. Not only that, the energy mock giving her more ultimates allows for higher uptime on her enhanced follow-ups. It just makes her do a lot more damage this mock. Also, she does a ton of follow-ups, so she hits both mechanics of Nikador, both the AoE portion and the frequent attacks portion. For that reason, Jade will be requiring nerfs. Next up, let's talk about Argenti. Right now, on paper, Argenti seems to serve a similar purpose to Jade, but he's just worse. The reason is because it is not physical week, and so Argenti just does less damage. Not only that, Argenti never uses his full ultimate because the bounces are pretty much wasted against AoE. You would rather be spamming the 90 cost ultimate. And so his main role, instead of being a DPS, kind of falls back into being a Jade and Herta driver, and for that reason, it's the same role that he had in previous mocks, and so his cost will not be changing. Next up, the Herta, this mock, is less good than expected, but she's still very good. She still takes complete garbage characters to clear, the 4-star Erudition, Small Herda, and Serval. She'll clear completely fine with these characters. The Energy Mach is also very good for her because she gets more ultimates and therefore more enhanced skill uptime. However, she does limited uptime nukes, she relies very heavily on her enhanced skill, and she doesn't attack very frequently, and for that reason she's just worse at clearing Nikador spears, which brings her clear speed down a little bit less. And for that reason, she's performing about the same as she has in previous mocks, and she will not be getting any buffs or any nerfs. Next up, let's talk about Acheron. Acheron, this mock is really good on side 1, because she's just good against Bug. The bugs give her several stacks, making her so that she isn't so reliant on Jiao Cho. Not only that, the Energy Blessing benefits her teammates, such as Pella, such as Jiao Cho, giving them more ultimates, and by proxy, giving Acheron more stacks. So, Acheron this mock is performing well, but her clear speed overall, because of HP inflation, is about the same as previously, so she won't be getting any nerfs. Next up, Serval right now seems to be performing pretty well. She looks like a budget Argenti, but is unironically better, because side 2 is all lightning weak, so she just does more damage than a 90 cost ultimate Argenti spam. And for that reason, Serval as an ult spam DPS actually seems to work as a hyper carry against Nikador. It is just better at clearing because it's lightning weak, but the consistency of these clears is still under investigation, so for now, Serval will not be getting any changes. Next up, let's talk about Aglaya. Aglaya seems okay right now. She still runs into the massive energy issues without Sunday and Ho-Ho at E0, mostly because the blessing doesn't proc on cycle 0. So she doesn't get the blessing that was tailor-made for her. So she's still suffering without these characters. This makes it so that she has very, very limited teammate options. E1 is a little bit better, but still requires bigger supports to do more consistent damage. But that being said, her speed works very well into Nikador's mechanics, and the blessing is still tailor-made for her. She is clearing a little bit faster than before. For that reason, she'll be requiring a few small nerfs. Next up, Jimmy this mock is actually performing surprisingly well. He does require Sunday in order for Lightning Lord to move in a reasonable time frame, but with Sunday, he's performing very well, kind of similar to Aglaya. His frequent hits are able to clear spears on Nikador pretty efficiently, and so his clear speed is a lot faster than before. For that reason, he will be requiring nerfs. Now, talking about single target crit and the other characters in the roster, for the most part, it's pretty dead across the board. They all require much higher investment in Eidolons and supports in order to clear in a relatively similar speed. And specifically for Dot, Nikador spears never move, so the Dot doesn't even proc. You're playing proc Dot, it's not a fun time. Fei Xiao, best in slot Fei Xiao, is still passable as a brute forcer. She can still brute force both sides in a reasonable time, but the energy blessing doesn't really benefit her. She's mostly carried by the fact that her frequent attacks work well into Nikador's mechanics, rather than her own damage. So for that reason, Fei Xiao will be requiring a few buffs, but her teams are still under investigation as we figure out the extent that she can still brute force. So for now, Kafka and Dot will be getting a few buffs. Fei Xiao will also be getting a few buffs. Next up, Yunli, Clara, and Jingliu this mock all suffer, even though the energy blessing seems good for them. It doesn't help that they're blast characters and they lack a lot of damage against the sheer amount of AoE this mock. Enemies in Wave 1, specifically for Clara and Yunli, do not attack a lot, and so they're not able to get off their counters, so they cannot clear Wave 1 very well, and so all of them are suffering. They will all be requiring buffs. Now, as for keeping an eye on things, certain comps that we are looking at and investigating, first off, Boothill does seem very strong, and his synergy with Fugue is very, very good. especially with the fugue buffs. So for now, hotfixes to Boot Hill will be coming. He will be getting nerfed alongside the Tribby cost implementation when Tribby comes out on the 26th, which is the day after Tribby comes out. Next up, E2 Daniel seems to be performing pretty well against the Imaginary Weak on side 1. The extra energy benefits E2 Daniel because he just gets more advances, and he's very, very cheap. So he can run cheap teams and still clear. So we are investigating it. It does look strong. Next up, as said previously, Serval right now is performing very well against Nikador by spamming ults. However, she does seem pretty inconsistent, and so we are still investigating the consistency of her clear speed and how well she can do on average. Next up, Jade drivers, especially with Tribby's release, will be reevaluated because Jade right now is already performing well. With the addition of Tribby, she'll be performing even better. So we'll be keeping an eye on this. And finally, as said before, we are investigating Fei Xiao's teams as well, seeing how strong she can brute force with her best in slot teams. Now, for the future of PhD and what's coming up, right now we have our Tribby cost implementation and Boot Hill nerfs coming on the 26th. After that, we have our next full patch, the second patch discussion, which will be released on a Sunday, March 2nd to 3rd, and it'll be fully implemented after discussion on the 5th of March, 5th or 6th of March, after which I will make a video to cover those changes. Next up, and finally, we have our 3.1 first half character tournament to celebrate Tribby's release. This will be taking place on March 8th through 9th. It'll be PhD rules. It's just for fun. Everyone's welcome to come and join. More information on signups, time zones, etc. can be found under the announcements in the Discord. The Discord link can be found in the description of this video. And that should conclude everything that we have for this current patch. I'll see you guys in 2 weeks. Goodbye.